What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the stream. I'm Ian Douglas. I'm the author of this website, techinterview.guide. Let me go fix my camera yet again. All right, bear with me for a sec while I fix the camera. Camera hub. Why do you always do this to me? Exposure. There we go. All right. Close enough. Let's do... Ooh, that's a bit bright. So what does random do? Well, type bang random, and you tell me what it does. Yep, y'all can control my lights now. So if you want like just a single color, you can put in a single color, and it'll change both the nano leaf as well as the Govy light. Little tip I learned from Loyal Moses. So appreciate people that are transparent about the tools that they use on their stream, because it can make it a lot of fun to kind of make things interactive as well. So let me just fix that. Save that. Cool. Welcome to the stream. Hope everybody's doing well. I thought today I'd go through a couple of resume reviews and talk about basically sorry, this is a helmet that I got from Loyal Moses as part of his Patreon tier. It's the Wrecker helmet. It doesn't fit on my head if I'm wearing my glasses, but if I take off my glasses, it actually fits really nicely. It does bonk on my nose a little bit, so it makes my nose a little bit sore. I might put like a little nose pad or something in there. But yeah, pretty cool helmet. Just get that out of the way. All right. So I wanted to go through some resume reviews today, specifically to talk about gaps on resumes and getting a job if you've got a gap on your resume. So in the meantime, if you do want to interact with the lights, feel free to just do like bang in a color, like red, yellow. There's like a bang flash that you can do that'll make them flash and flicker. And again, it's going to control both the nano leaf as well as the light bar on the back of the desk. Can't set them independently yet. I'll try to figure that out kind of as they go. I'm just trying it as a free trial. I'm not even sure how much the software costs, but it is kind of a neat sort of setup. I'm debating just continuing to work on my own like sort of Twitch chatbot to control that kind of stuff myself. But in the meantime, welcome to the stream. So I had a couple of resumes come in this past week. Both were anonymized, but one of them, they wanted a private resume review, specifically because they had some gaps on the resume. They wanted to know how to talk about having gaps on the resume. And so what I want to do on the stream is actually walk through kind of their job history. Now, I'm not going to say who they are, where they worked, things like that, but I do want to sort of mention like sort of how long it took to get their job, and then like gaps in between the jobs, and then what you can do to like how a hiring manager is going to kind of look at that at a first glance, as well as taking a deeper dive and kind of the assumptions and presumptions that they're going to make about you when they start to see gaps like that on the resume. So hey folks, thanks for dropping by. I thought the stream was scheduled later on Sunday. So I actually changed last Sunday. Starting on Sundays, I'm going to be streaming in the mornings on Sundays instead of at night. I had some people over in Europe that were interested in both being on the stream as well as just being here live, and they couldn't attend if I was doing it only late at night. So yeah, so I decided on Sundays I was going to start streaming earlier. So I'm going to be doing 10 a.m. Pacific, which is 1 p.m. Eastern. The math on that always messes me up, but only on Sundays. Thursday, it's still going to be Thursday night, but Sundays I'm going to do earlier in the day. So yeah, thanks for dropping by. Good to see both of you. Hadn't seen you in a while, so thanks for dropping by, Chad. Appreciate it. So yeah, today we're going to do some resume reviews and just talk about gaps on resumes. And so same kind of format, feel free to drop questions in chat by all means. And I will be streaming for about hour and a half. And then we'll go from there. Church on Sundays, yeah. I get that. So the timing of it's not going to be great for everybody, but I hope that you're not watching my stream while you're at church. Pay attention to like what's going on at church. But yeah, thanks for dropping by. Juggling biohazards. I love your username. It's great. What are your thoughts on pseudonym online presence versus real name? I feel like as long as you're constant with a brand, it's okay. But your thoughts? I would say pseudonyms are totally fine as long as it's safe for work. Like if you call yourself like 420 jerkwad 69 or something like that, like be professional about it. But pseudonyms totally okay. And I agree. If you use the same username all over the place, it makes you more discoverable, as we call it. And so if you use the same username on Twitter and GitHub and Linktree and Instagram and all that kind of stuff, then they can find you. The downside is if you don't want them to find you on Instagram and you use the same username, they could still discover you using that username. And so it could backfire by using the same username. But I'm totally okay with it. As a hiring manager, as long as it's a respectful, kind of work-friendly kind of name, no one's going to care. Like if you call yourself like, Bridge Troll 22 or something like that, like nobody's like, they'll get a chuckle out of it. Or, juggling biohazards or something like that. No one's going to mind that kind of thing. It's more like when you're starting to like border on things that are just not good for like work environment and people feeling safe and things like that. That's where companies are going to draw the line and either ask you to change your username or use a different username while you're at work, especially for things like GitHub profiles and things like that. But as far as like Slack handles and things like that, I mean, I would say a Slack handle, they probably want to contact you using your real name. But yeah, I would say as long as it's professional, it's probably not going to be a big deal. So no biohazards, and agreed as long as it's respectful. I mean, biohazard I think is fine. It depends what the biohazard is. Trying to think of something that's not too off color. My kids are in the room next to me, and I try to keep it pretty family friendly around the channel. But like, noxious gas or something like that. Like, yeah, it's probably not great. I mean, if you work remote, it's probably fine. But they might worry like, oh, if you show up at the office, are you gonna like fart all the time or something like that? Might might color people's opinion of you a little bit. So yeah, just things to keep in mind as you consider that. But no, generally, like I would say as long as it's friendly, I don't see why a company would have a problem with it. Some companies, though, they do want to maintain a certain amount of professionalism. And so they may ask like, hey, like if you want to tweet on your own time, that's fine, but please don't retweet like work things with your, weird username or things like that. When I was a teacher at Turing, we often saw students who would register a GitHub profile name and then come to the school, and then all of the instructors would be like, that's a really dumb username, like you should change that username, but they had been using it for a while. The nice thing about GitHub, though, and some services, is if you change your pseudonym or your handle to something else, they'll actually redirect you for a while until somebody else comes in and registers your name. Or they'll say like, hey, no one else can register that name for 6 months until like other redirects and things like that kind of kick in. But you're still going to have to figure out, like if you change like your GitHub username, for example, you're probably going to have to go through all of your repos and change all of your sort of GitHub remotes on your terminal to point to your new username. Otherwise, like you're not going to be able to push and pull things. So things like that could have an impact. And so it's more of an inconvenience than anything. So a little bit of foresight can kind of save you some trouble there. So yeah. So again, I added some fun new stuff. If y'all want to control the lights, just do bang, an exclamation point, and then like the name of a color. And you should see all the lights behind me change. So if you make it like aqua, purple, pink, blue, green, red, there's a flash. There's also a bang random, which should set it to a random color. There's an RGB, which I'm not sure what the RGB one does. Oh, it just cycles RGB. And then there's also a hex code one where I think you can set a specific hex code, which would be kind of fun. But yeah, play around. Feel free to play around with those. I may come up with like a few custom ones specifically for like the shade of purple that I use and stuff like that on the site. So yeah, just something a little more fun and interactive. Yep, there you go. It's all green now. Good job. Nope, someone turned to purple. There it goes. Or I wonder if it changes back like after a few seconds or something, because I had set it as purple. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, have fun with it. There's also the drop game if you want to play drop. You can do drop and then like an emoji, and you should see it like drop on the page at some point. Wait, is that not working now? Maybe I can't play the game, but if you do like drop, it should drop like a little icon for you and whatever. And I'm also thinking about changing the layout of the screen a little bit over the next little while. I'm looking at some other sorts of layouts and things like that, just to kind of change it up a little bit. I've been using this layout now for almost a year, so I might change it up a little bit over the next month or two. Cool. So yeah, feel free to drop other questions in chat. I'm happy to address those kind of as we go. So yeah, appreciate everybody dropping by. So yeah, so as I mentioned, I had a couple of resumes come in. One was anonymized, but they asked for my review to be private. And so I'm not going to share their full resume. But what they were specifically looking for was feedback on how to look at gaps on a resume. And so what I want to do is I kind of want to break down like, here's when they graduated, here's when they got their jobs, and all the different gaps that they had, and how you can explain that kind of stuff on a resume, and whether gaps even matter. And I'll talk about some other like mentorship, folks that I've been working with, and talk about their gaps and things like that. And then I do have an anonymized resume that I'm going to pull up and kind of do like a full resume review for them. They're also based in Europe, and so it's more of the CV format. And so it's a little more content. It's a 2-page sort of layout, but we'll talk about kind of differences between resumes and CVs kind of as we go. So feel free to drop comments as we go. As I get into these resume reviews, I'm going to like clip them and get them on YouTube and things like that. And so I will relay, like if there's feedback on a particular resume or things that stand out to you, feel free to drop that in the chat, and I'll make sure that gets kind of interacted with as part of the explanation, and say like, hey, if you want to come interact on the stream, come hang out on Twitch, stuff like that. Cool. All right, well, let's dive in a little bit. So I'm going to change my scene. I'm going to go over to here, and we're going to start with the anonymous resume. So this is the CV that came in, and I haven't seen it before. Like aside from like pulling it up here in OBS, I've not seen this before. So this is my first time really looking at it. I'm going to try and zoom in on it just a little bit more if I can. There we go. That'll be a little bit better, I think. Cool. Let's dive in. So they anonymized their name. They've got Southwest London. They've got presumably they'd put a phone number on here and an email. I would say that you could probably get rid of the headings on here, because if you put a phone number on there, people are going to recognize the pattern of a phone number. Same with email. A couple of other things that I would like to see in here would be things like a LinkedIn profile, maybe a GitHub profile. So if you've got this much room anyway, the location may be important. If you're looking for a job where they expect you to be at the office, then having a location on there can be helpful. But having a location on your resume or CV can also subject you to geographic bias, where someone might look at that and go, oh, you're in London, I'm looking for someone in New York, so I'm not even gonna interview you because you're 5 hours ahead of New York, or I'm gonna have to pay to relocate you, and relocating you to another country is expensive and something that we would rather not deal with. And so you get biased against whether you know it or not. And so sometimes having your location on your resume or CV, it can be a bad thing. Now, the way that most people put together a CV, they have a profile, they talk about like areas of expertise, and then like lots of information about their job. And this kind of stuff is totally okay. I got a good chuckle out of University of Nerds in the US. I thought that was great. A few things though that I would mention is the point of a resume and the point of a CV is to clearly and quickly communicate the value that you're bringing to that company. And so the same kind of advice that I would typically give on the stream is going to apply, where I tell people, build a really big resume. Put everything on that resume that you possibly can, as far as jobs, lots of bullet points, lots of skills, lots of things that you've sort of built, and projects that you've done. Get all of that on a really, really big page. or big document. And then when you go to apply for a job, that's where you're going to trim it down to like 1 page or 2 pages, depending on the length that you want to have for your resume. And you're going to do that by trimming away things that company's not going to care about. So I've gotten to know one of our UK recruiters at work. I work at a company called Postman, and we had someone join the recruiting team the same day that I started. And so he and I have been kind of communicating back and forth, and I said, hey, can I get on a phone call with you and just talk about like the differences between resumes and CVs? And he was all for it. He's like, yeah, let's nerd out on it. And so we got on a call, and we were just talking about like the differences between a North American resume and kind of the European style CV, and how they're actually really similar. At the end of the day, a recruiter's looking over this going, what value are you bringing to my company? Like do you match the job description? And so just having, giant blocks of text makes it just as hard for them to read as it does over here in North America. And so one comment that Tony, this guy that I was talking with, one thing that we kind of agreed on is the format that I had sort of styled my own resume. He actually really liked that format and that style. And so if you go check out techinterview.guide, I think chapter 9 is my whole chapter on resumes, that you can go check out like how I sort of formulate a resume. There's also a free resources link on the site where you can go see like a sample resume that I put together. If you want some like formatting ideas and things like that, you can go download those. So having a profile on the resume, this can be good at a glance to show the value that you're bringing. But I would say if you need the space to like highlight other things like skills and projects and things like that, this part can be taken away. You don't have to have this on your resume. Areas of expertise, this is typically what we would call like a skills block. In this case, they've got a lot of background about the kinds of work that they've been doing, and then getting into their professional experience. Now, my expertise is going to be in the tech industry, specifically around software development, where this person's background is not typically software development, more on the quality side of it, like QA and testing. And so I don't recognize some of the skills and things that they have in here. Some of them I do, like HIPAA and GDPR. These are the data privacy kinds of things, and ISO are processes and things that you follow as a business to make sure that you are business compliant with government regulations and things like that. But things like UDRLX, DSP is a pretty generic term. Like I might think of that as like digital signal processing, because that's like an audio term that I know. And so I might look at that going, what does digital signal processing have to do with a QA job? I don't know what GCP is. I don't know what GAMP5 is. Maybe other people who are into quality roles know what those tools are. And so this is where having industry-specific acronyms on a page can actually negatively affect someone's response to your resume, because they're not going to know what these terms are and what they mean. So you might want to spell out like some of these actual tools, especially when you've got lots of extra space on here. You've got a lot of extra space here. You got a lot of extra space over here. I think you could spell some of these things out a little bit more. When we get into the professional experience, I would definitely tighten up the spacing that you've got around here. You got to like, this is pretty spread out. I would try to like bring these dates in a little bit more. And then with bullet points, my typical kind of advice is going to sort of stand here. A bullet point does not need to be a grammatically correct sentence, and it should not wrap onto another line. And so a lot of these bullet points actually wrap where we have a single word or only a couple of words afterward. And this word left hanging by itself in sort of like digital layout is something we call an orphan. It's left on its own. It's all by itself. And so if we trim this down in content length, it kind of alleviates this orphaned word on its own line by itself. But again, bullet points don't have to be grammatically correct. So oversight of CSV activities and in charge of approval of documentation within product development and study delivery. I would probably rephrase this whole thing. And what you want to do is you want to start with a strong action verb, like oversaw CSV activities, comma, documentation approval, comma, product development, comma, study delivery. You don't need all of these extra filler words in between because it doesn't have to be a grammatically correct sentence. We're just looking for strong action verbs. Can you quantify any information? Like how many activities were there? When I look over this whole block of text, I don't really see anything quantified. I see that you delivered things, you reported, you facilitated, you worked closely with, but you don't quantify like how many CSV activities were there? Were there 100? Were there 1,000? Were there 2? Like try to get some numbers on here that tell me what your impact was. So we're looking for an action verb, we're looking for quantifiable information, we're looking for impact. And the more succinctly you can give us that in a bullet point, the easier we're going to be able to read all of this. And so I would definitely trim up the quantity of text that you have on here. Now, you've been at this job since September 2019, so you've been there 2.5 years. I'm just using round numbers here. So you've been there 2.5 years, and you've done quite a bit in 2.5 years, and that's fantastic. You started this job September 2019. Your last job you left in February 2019, and so you've got a bit of a gap on the resume. And so this is kind of like following our theme for today of like, how do we talk about gaps on a resume? In this case, probably nobody's going to care. I mean, let's say you went from the end of February to the start of September. So you had March, April, May, June, July, August. So you had 6 months between jobs. Probably nobody's going to care about a 6-month gap. That's not that big of a deal. If it's a repeated sort of pattern, then that starts to stand out, and we'll see an example of that later on in the session. But from here, you went from December 2016 to from November 2016 to December 2016. So there was like barely any gap at all. So that's negligible. Going from February 2016 to March 2016, also a pretty negligible sort of gap in here. And so, the only real gap that I'm seeing, January to March is not a big deal. The font changed here from the typical font that you had been using to now you've gone to a non-serif font, and then you went back to a serif font. So keep your font style the same on the entire page. And I also see that this font got much smaller than other font on here. So I would just highlight everything on the page, make everything 10-point font, and then go in and make these headings like maybe 12 to 14 point. If you want to add some color or something on there, that would be fine. Right now, all of the font on this page is kind of this blue color. I would probably just make all the text black text and make these headings this shade of blue. I think that'll help the headings to stand out a little bit. But as far as the overall content, I would make it all 10-point font and then trim these things up. So no one's going to read a 3-line bullet point. When we skim bullet points, we're only picking up the first 5 to 8 words. And so we're kind of like skimming through really quickly, looking for information, and our eyes are going to take the path of least resistance on the page. So our eyes are looking for gaps on the page, and that's where you're drawing our eyesight. And that's why visual layout is so important, because they can actually draw your eye from one part of a web page to another page or on an advertisement. They're actually drawing your eyesight based on the use of space on the page and layout on the page. And it's the same thing with resumes and CVs. Like as I'm scanning through this, my eyesight's kind of like going over to these shorter terms, because it's easier for my eyesight to kind of pick out these short, SDLC, CSV, ISO, requirements and so on. But I'm not picking up a lot of other information. I'm picking up all these acronyms like, oh, you worked with HIPAA, and here again with a CSV kind of thing. And so you're talking about CSV and GAMP5 like a lot on here. And so again, I think you could summarize like, I did CSV, I did GAMP5, I did HIPAA, I did GDPR or GDPR, and just define that like one time, or explain what those things are in these bullet points. But I don't think you need to explain it over and over and over again. And so again, I think that's going to help to kind of compact this text a little bit. These other bullet points, at like what I'm noticing here is your previous jobs, you go into fewer and fewer bullet points, and that's a fantastic sort of scheme to follow. Your first job or your most recent job, you want to explain a whole lot more, because this is the stuff that they're going to care about most. And then as you get into prior jobs, you want fewer bullet points kind of as you go. Aveline French subscribed for a month. Hey, Aveline, appreciate the subscription. Thank you so much. Camilo also asked, is a GitHub link necessary if it's light on activity, especially for those who aren't software developers? That's a great question. I would say if you are getting into development, having a GitHub link can be helpful. It lets us see that you are actively doing software development, even if you're new. It still gives us some indication of your amount of development activity. It's not required, but again, the more information I have about you, the more I can make a decision about hiring you. So if you can kind of bring that to my attention, it's better for you if you have it, for sure. It's not required though, not at all. So yeah, so just going back to these bullet points. So these other roles, clinical engineering, biomedical engineer, you're giving me fewer and fewer bullet points. But again, give me an action verb, give me some quantifiable information, and tell me what kind of impact you had. I think that's what's going to help really stand out a lot more on a CV or on a resume. Cool. Just double checking a couple other things are still working for me here. And then education, again, just making sure that the font size and everything is kind of standardized here, because all the font size down here got really, really small. Some of the training and certification could be helpful up on page 1 where you're listing your other skills. So keep that in mind. You may want to move all of your skills just kind of into one area, and that can include these certifications. So that's up to you. It's up to your discretion if you want to kind of put all those things together. But if that's something that's helpful in your job, then you can certainly make that more prominent on the page. Because if these certifications or this kind of training, if this is important to my company, I need to see that. I need that to be very prominent. And the best place to make that prominent is right here at the top of page 1 or near the top of page 1. And that's why I tell people on my website, like, the first thing I hope to see on a resume as a hiring manager and as a developer is your skills block. Because when I have a job post, I'm looking for certain kinds of programming languages, certain kinds of frameworks, certain kinds of testing skills, maybe particular libraries. And if you show me that right at the top of your resume, it allows me to make a very quick sort of assessment on, yeah, okay, you've got the skill that I need. I'm going to add you to my to-do list, kind of pile of I need to call this person. But if I have to go through a multi-page resume and try to find all this information on my own, I'm probably going to give up. I'm probably going to miss details, and you're less likely to get a phone call. So making things really prominent is important. And so that's why I tend to give out the advice of make a really big resume. Put everything on this resume that you possibly can. Every project, every place you've worked. Give me lots of bullet points about every place that you worked, your involvement, all that kind of stuff, any volunteer work, blah, blah, blah. Just make a gigantic document. And then when you're ready to apply for a job, you make a copy of that document and you shrink it back down to 1 page or 2 pages, depending on the length that you want to make your resume. A lot of people would be like, you have to have a 1-page resume. And I'd say, nah, especially for career changers, that's not necessarily the case. I think a 2-page resume is totally fine as long as you're conveying only the important things that I need to know about you. I don't need to know everything about your background, everything about your history. If you need to fill space, then yes, fill it up with that stuff. But if you're aiming for a 1-page resume, you can trim it down and only show me the relevant languages, frameworks, tools, and whatever that my job description mentions and that you, through your company research, have found out that my company is going to care about. Put that on your resume and get me that resume. That's what's going to stand out. That's what makes you look like the best candidate, is that it's really easy to see that you've got the skills that we need. You're showing the immediate value that you bring to my team, and it's really fast to find that information. All right, so that'll take care of that anonymized resume. So let's close that up. And so what I want to do now is I want to go through this other resume that someone else submitted to me. And again, they sent it over as a private request to review. And so I'm not going to actually show their resume, but what I do want to show is how they've had some gaps on the resume and the impact that can have, and sort of the assumptions that people are going to make as they review your resume. And so this is their anonymized resume. I'm not showing it, but I'm going to start documenting in my code editor here, kind of from the reverse chronological order a little bit. Pulling out the popcorn, that's great. Also, G&D asked in chat, are cover letters still relevant? Should it be included if they don't ask? If they don't ask for one, I would say you don't have to write one. The resume, though, is meant to be a document of your background and the facts that they need to know about how relevant you are for that job. The cover letter allows you to add a little more sort of context to that, where you can explain a little bit more from a creative writing point of view why they should call you. And so that's kind of how I describe that to people, is your cover letter is kind of the creative writing version of your resume. You don't have to re-explain everything on your resume in the cover letter, but the cover letter can give a lot more context and background to what they see on your resume. So if you're like a job changer, career changer, like, you know, you did some other kind of work and then you went to like a boot camp or you went back to school and now you want to get into software development, your cover letter can explain more about that background and why you made that transition, because the resume is just going to show that a transition happened, but they aren't going to have the context as to how or why, where your cover letter could explain that. So if they don't ask for one, then there's no real way for you to upload one. I have in the past given advice where it's like your resume should be page 1 and your cover letter can be page 2. So as they're scrolling through, they can see the cover letter at the end. If they care to read it, they will. That's one way that you could do it. If they do have a place for you to upload a cover letter, I would take the time and write one. You can reuse a lot of text from one cover letter to another. But again, the cover letter has to clearly convey the value that you bring to their company. And so you can't write a generic cover letter and say, like, you know, this is Ian and this is why I got into development and, you know, this is what I care about and this is what I'm passionate about. Because you need to show that your passion and the direction that you're taking your career is aligned with their company. And so you're going to have to customize that at least a little bit for each of the companies where you're going to be applying and writing those cover letters. But you could probably reuse 75 to 80% of the text that you write in a cover letter. You just can't use the exact same cover letter from company to company. That would be my thoughts on cover letters there. Camillo said, I removed months from my timeline in my experience in education. I just put the year that it was completed. This is a suggestion from another hiring manager. Definitely hides gaps in the months, if any. I do have thoughts on that. And I will get into some of that as I go through this person's resume, where I'm not showing the resume, but I am going to build this timeline and kind of the assumptions that I'm going to be making. If you only put years on your resume, it can hide the gap. But if you said, you know, I was at this job from 2004 to 2007, I don't know whether you started in January 2004 or if you started in December of 2004. And I don't know if you left at the beginning of 2007 or the end of 2007, because the amount of time that you spent at that job varies a lot. If you started at the beginning of 2004 and left at the end of 2007, you had all of 2004, 2005, 2006, and 2007. You were at that job for 4 full years, roughly. But if you started at the end of 2004, then that year goes away. And if you left at the beginning of 2007, that year goes away. And now you were at that job for 2 years. If you were there from December 2004 to January 2007, you were really only there for 2 years and 2 months. And so only having a year on your resume can be a little bit misleading, because it's a lot harder for me to determine how long you were actually at that job. Now, if you tell me that you were there from 2004 to 2007, and then you explain I was there for 2.5 years, now I've got to try to figure out, well, where did that 6 months kind of play in? And because you're giving me a 4-year time span, but you're telling me that of that 4 years, you were only there for 2.5 of those years. And so I've got to try to piece that together, and I'm still going to realize that there was a gap. So I don't know that taking the months off of there is really going to matter, to be honest. I would probably keep the month on. I think it's going to help them make a better assessment. And kind of today's theme is, how do we explain gaps on a resume? So that last resume that we saw, where there was a bit of a gap on the resume, most people aren't going to think twice about a gap on the resume if it's the only gap. But what we're going to see with this person's timeline is there are a number of gaps, and there are some extended gaps. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how to sort of explain those or talk about those as we go. But before I do, Juggling Biohazard asks, when it comes to skills, Do you also like a scale of 1 to 10 or percentage? No, I wouldn't put scales or percentages on there because those are completely subjective. What does a rating of 4 out of 5 mean when it comes to JavaScript? I have no idea. And I used to joke with people, usually students, where they'd be like, I'm like 7 out of 10 on a particular topic. And I would say, well, what does 7 mean? And so I started coming up with a scale of like 10 means I invented it. 9 means I have written several books on the subject. 8 means I've written one book on the subject. 7 means I could write a book on the subject. 6 means I've given like professional presentations on the topic. And now you've got like a 1 to 5 scale of how well do you actually know that topic. And so it's a very subjective term, or a very subjective way of like showing your skill, because what does that range actually mean? So no, I would completely take them off. I would say how long you've used that particular skill. On my resume, for example, I say things like I've done Python for 10 years. I did Perl and PHP each for 10 years, and they were all overlapping at different times. Or I would say I've done Postgres for 6 years. I've done MySQL for 12 years. And so they can kind of get a relative sense of like when I've used skills and how long I've used them, because that'll give them some presumption into my involvement in using that technology without specifying like, oh yeah, I'm a total expert at using MySQL, or I know absolutely everything about Postgres. I'm not conveying that. I'm not telling them that. I'm not even hinting at that. I'm just saying I have used this particular thing for an amount of time. And then, throughout the process, they'll kind of test you on that, and they'll ask you, maybe trivia type questions about it to kind of get a sense of how deep was your actual involvement in using that technology. So no, I wouldn't put skills or percentages or anything like that on a resume. I would take all of that off. I would just list the skills and let them determine how well you know those skills. Because really at the end of the day, if you claim to know a certain amount and they test you during the interview, they're going to be coming up with their own sort of assessment on how well you know a particular skill. So just let them figure that out. Just say you know the skill and they'll figure out how well they think you know the skill, because that's how they're determining whether you're going to be applicable for that job. Juggling Biohazards followed up and said, I was thinking the same thing, but I see a lot of resume templates or portfolios with that scaling. No, I would take that scaling off. I wouldn't do it at all for a software developer job. If it is something where you can legitimately quantify, like I've done, 3 of 10 certifications in this particular topic. But again, you could just say I've completed 3 certifications on the topic, because next month there could be an 11th one. Or maybe they remove some of them and now there's only 5 and you have 3 of the 5. Like, even those things can change. So I wouldn't bother with any sort of scale on a resume at all. Coding Garden Fan, good to see you. Hello. Camilo says, I can explain the gap in the interview if it gets me in the door for a phone interview, but probably a disservice to my resume if months show gaps. Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit more about gaps. And so one mentee that I've been working with, I actually just got a message from them the other day on LinkedIn that they've got like a second or a third offer now, which is fantastic. They've actually been out of school for more than a year. They graduated a year ago from a university program. So for all of you that are career changers and you've been thinking like, oh, I want to change my career, I want to go to boot camp, but I hear it's really hard to get a job. Well, guess what? It can be really hard to get a job even if you go to university. What you have to do is you have to show what you've been doing since you graduated to show that you're keeping your skills sharp, that you're still staying involved, and that you're not just sitting around watching Netflix all day or playing video games. Like, what are you doing with that time? And I think that that's important to explain on any kind of gap. But what I want to go through as I kind of work through this person's timeline is explain how I've dealt with gaps on my own resume and how I kind of cover that up a little bit. And it makes it look not as drastic. Because when you have a big gap, you can start to look unemployable. And that's the thing that you need to be careful of. And this happened with a colleague of mine I worked with at a previous job. They went to a new job. It was really toxic. And they're like, I can't stand this. I left. And then they needed to take some time off to kind of decompress from that toxic work culture, which I totally understand. but then they kind of like eased back into the job hunt, and they kind of took their time looking for jobs. They wanted to try to find like the perfect job. Well, a year went by, and suddenly like nobody was calling them, and they're like, what's going on? And I looked at their resume and I looked at their GitHub profile, and I'm like, you're coming across as unemployable at this point, because you've got all this technical skill, but you've been unemployed for so long now that you're not explaining what you've been doing in that time. There's nothing on GitHub to show that you've been learning anything. Like you're not showing growth in any particular area. And I was actually a hiring manager at the time, and I'm like, why don't I just hire you? I'll give you a job and whatever. And they worked out great on the team, and they kind of got back into working in tech, and they've been working fine since then. I think they left that job, and they're on to like 2 or 3 jobs since, which is fine. But sometimes you just need somebody to give you a chance, but I think you need to be able to explain that gap. So let's go through this person's timeline. Again, I'm not showing their resume because they asked their resume to be private, but I thought it was important to at least talk about kind of the sequence of things. So their graduation was in 2000. They had an engineering background, and so they graduated in 2000, and the first job that they got was in October. So in October of 2000, they got their first job, and they were there until July of 2005. Now, when they said that they graduated on their resume, they only had the year that they graduated. And so as a hiring manager, I'm going to make a presumption that it was probably springtime. So let's give them the benefit of the doubt and say it was May. So between May and October, they had June, July, August, September, October. Let's call it 4 months. So there was a 4-month gap between graduation and getting that first job. No one's going to blink at that. It takes time to get a job when you graduate. No big deal. No one's going to think twice about that. They left this job in July of 2005. Their next job was January of 2006, and they were there until February of 2007. Well, this shows another gap. So between July of 2005 and January of 2006 is roughly half a year. But again, I don't know if they left at the end of July and they started at the beginning of January. Like so I'm going to try to give them the benefit of the doubt here and say, let's presume they left at the end of July and they started in early January. So they had August, September, October, November, December. They had a 5-month gap here. And then they went from February 2007. Their next job was actually also February 2007. So they immediately switched to another job, and they were there until September of 2007. Now, these jobs were relatively short. When we think about the timeline here, they were here for about 5 years. This job, they were here for 13 months. And this job, they were only here from February to September. So let's assume that they left, mid-February. Well, again, we'll give them the benefit here, and we'll say they left the job in mid-February and they started the other job like the next week or something like that. And so they worked March, April, May, June, July, August, September. They were here for 7 months. So we'll say about 7 months. Now, the fact that they went right from one job to another job with no gap, it looks better for them, because there's no gap at that point. The next job that they got, they started in November of 2007, and they were there until July of 2010. So again, doing some rough math, they were there a little over 2.5 years. But in between here, they had a 2-month gap. Now, I can see on their resume that this 2-month gap allowed for a relocation. And so there was a relocation in here. And again, no one's going to think twice about that. So they're going to look at that and go, okay, that's no big deal, no problem. And effectively no gap at that point. They left this job in July 2010. The next job that they got was November 2011, and they were there until August 2019. So they were here a really long time. They were here like 8 years, which looks fantastic on a resume. Now, on a tech resume, sometimes this can backfire on you. If you've been at a job for a really long time, they wonder like, well, did you really progress at that job? Were you really learning and growing at that job? or were you just doing like the same thing like day in and day out? But they were here for a good long year, and their resume actually does show some progression, and they did some team leadership and things like that. Like they were a staff level sort of person at that job. And then the next job that they list was June 2020 until January 2021. So looking at this one here, there was another big gap in here. So they went from, well, there was almost a full year gap between August 2019 and June 2020. It's almost a full year in here. So again, if we give them the benefit and say they left in late August and they started at the beginning of June, they went September, October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May. So that was a 9-month gap. And then they were only at this job for June through January, so they were only here for about 7 months. So they show a bit of a history of having really long job, a couple of short jobs, some really long jobs, and a short job. But the thing is, they're currently unemployed. They're currently looking for another job, which means they haven't been working since January 2021. And so their current gap is going on, again, giving them the benefit that they left at the end of January, February, March, we're into April. So they've currently got a 15-month gap where they have been unemployed now for over a year, approaching a year and a half, where they haven't been working at all. So at first glance, some hiring managers are going to look at this and go, wow, look at all these gaps. Look at all these short jobs. Yeah, there were a couple of long jobs in there, but yeah, it kind of shows some risky behavior of if we hire them, are they going to leave in 7 months? Because they've got 2 jobs on here that are 7 months long. And so that may start to outweigh the fact that they were at their prior job for 8 years, and the one before that was 2.5 years. The fact that this relocation happened and there was no gap in here, we could almost come in here and say, you know what, you were pretty much working constantly between these jobs for almost 5 years. So we could actually boil all of this down here and say, you know, it wasn't at the same job, but you were effectively working here for 5 years. But there was also a gap in between these jobs that I missed. So from July 2010 until November 2011, again, they went August, September, October, and then another full year. So again, there was like a 14-month gap in between these jobs. And so they're showing a history of working for a long time, taking some time off, working for a long time, taking some time off, working for a long time, taking some time off. In this case, they ended up working a really short job, and now they're taking a lot of time off. And so this person reached out and they're like, how do I explain this? And so the thing that I want to talk about today is, if you have a story to tell, no one's going to care about having a gap on your resume, even if there are multiple gaps like this. Because at the end of the day, when they look at this, if they sit down and they actually do the math, they're going to see, okay, you know what, this first gap after graduation and finding that job, nobody cares. So your first job, you were there for 5 years. A 5-month gap between jobs, it's pretty negligible. No one's really going to think twice about that. So you were effectively working for a full decade. Having a little bit of a gap in there is like, yeah, maybe you needed a break, that's fine. After a decade, you took a year and a half off, and then you worked for another 8 years. So some people could look at that and go, okay, well, call it a sabbatical. Sabbatical? Spelling is hard. Like, you know, you could explain this in so many different ways. Like, what were you doing in that 14 months? But then, you know, working for almost another decade and then taking another block of time off. Again, I'm seeing more of a pattern of you work for a long time and then you take some time for yourself, and then you work for a long time and you take some time for you. The problem is this job and this gap where you didn't stay at this job a very long time and you've got another really big gap. Now, the fact that, you know, their total career here, they've been working for almost 2 decades. They're kind of at a point now where people are going to look at this and go, okay, well, are you staying current on technology? Like, how are you spending your time? And so this is where I would coach somebody to say, hey, you know what? This is where you want to say that you took a sabbatical and say, you know what? I you need to explain why you were only at this job for 7 months when all of your other job history was pretty consistent. Having these other little gaps from time to time, I mean, you could explain that in so many ways. I took time off for family. I took some time off for some travel. I worked for a decade and I rewarded myself with a year off. And then I went back on the job hunt and it took a couple of months to find a job. And then, I worked at this job for a really long time and I wanted to find my next experience. And so I took some time. But for this 15-month gap where they're still currently unemployed, this is where it starts to get a little harder to explain. But I think if you can call it a sabbatical, if you've been in the industry long enough, you kind of deserve a break, honestly. You kind of deserve some time off. You deserve, some recognition of like, yeah, you've been at this a while. But the sabbatical is not just, I decided to kind of kick back and play video games for a year and a half. Because finding this next job in tech, you need to show that you're still relevant. You need to show that you have current skills. And so this sabbatical, whatever it is, show me some project work. Show me some certifications. Show me some volunteer work. Like, what were you doing with this year and a half? They're currently on the job hunt. So let's say they took a year off and now they're back on the job hunt for a couple of months. You could explain away that year and just say, you know what, like this has kind of been the pattern that I've taken. This job happened to be short. Maybe you got laid off. Maybe, you put in some effort there and decided it wasn't what you wanted. You need to have a story about why that job was short when so many of your other jobs were much longer. But the harder thing that they're going to have to explain is their current gap between jobs. They've been unemployed for going close to a year and a half. And why is that? That's what recruiters are going to care about, is that you've been unemployed for a long time. And because you've been in the industry for a long time, they need to know, like, what skills are you bringing? Like, yes, you bring a lot of work experience to the team, but what is your current skill set? Some of the technologies that they listed on their resume are kind of dated. It's like, okay, well, what about newer technologies? Are you doing any full stack kind of work? Are you actually getting into more contributor level work, or do you want to stay at kind of that staff architect kind of upper level kind of contributor where you're not doing as much hands-on contribution to the team? Again, you need to convey that to the company as far as the value that you bring to them. So you can explain gaps from time to time. So in this case, I would say, you know what, I worked for a decade, I took a year off, and then I got back on the job hunt. I worked for another big chunk of time and I took some time off, again, just for family or travel or just to take a break. Totally okay. You could say I took a 6-month break and then it took a couple of more months to find a job. Fine, no problem. The fact that this job was short, you need a story to tell. Why was that job 7 months long? Because as a hiring manager, I look at that and go, okay, well, it's going to take you, say, 2 months, maybe 3 months to kind of ramp up on a job. And if you chose to leave that job, that last month, you were probably kind of winding down what you were doing. So of this 7 months, you took maybe 2 months, maybe 3 months to get ramped up, and you took a month to, kind of wind down from that job. So you really only worked there for like 3 months. You really only gave them 3 to 4 months of actual effort. That is something that you're going to need to explain. Like, why was that job so short? Like, what happened? And I don't know the story of what happened or why that job was short. But that's something that they're going to have to figure out how to explain. And then as far as the sabbatical goes, again, you could, show me that you've got current work. Show me that you've got current projects that you've built, that you've designed, or that you've gone and worked on some certifications or something just to keep your skills current, because you graduated 2 decades ago. I feel this myself. I'm like, in a couple of weeks, it's April 10th today. On the 28th is going to be my 26th anniversary of graduating from college. So I feel this myself when I apply for jobs. People want to know, how am I staying current on my skills? And so I constantly have to show them, well, this is what I'm doing lately with Python. This is what I'm doing lately learning React. This is what I'm doing lately studying towards cloud architecture certifications, because I want to stay current. I know that in tech, you got to keep learning. You can't just, I've learned this one thing and that's all I need to learn, and you just kind of sit back and kick back. You can't really do that in tech. And so I would highly suggest, if you've got any kind of gap on your resume, have some kind of project work or something that you can sort of talk about. The other way that I have hidden gaps on my own resume is by saying I have a consultancy called iandouglas.com. And any kind of gap in my resume, it's like, yeah, I did some freelance work for a couple of friends, just small little projects just to kind of, build them a little website or build them a little payment, paywall or something. Like, you can explain away little gaps just by saying, I've been running iandouglas.com for 25 years. And it's just kind of the side thing that I do. If I take a break between jobs, I'll do some consulting work. And every recruiter I've ever talked to, they're like, all right, cool. I've never once been questioned on like, did you really? It's like, yeah, I really did. I've actually got names of like companies. I can give you references of companies where I've done freelance work. Like, it's a legit thing. So any kind of gap I put on my resume, I can just kind of hide as iandouglas.com and just say, yeah, I was doing some consulting work for a couple of months. And then I, got back into like a full-time role. So while I was job hopping, I was still doing other consulting work to kind of keep those skills sharp. In this particular case, though, this person's been unemployed going on a year and a half. They need to show current project work or current growth to get back into the job hunt, or they need somebody to take a chance on them to kind of help them get back into a tech role. So those are my thoughts on explaining gaps on a resume, where there are a lot of gaps and there are big gaps, like 14 months, 9 months, 15 months. Those are pretty significant gaps on a resume. But again, you can explain it as, I took some time off for family. Like, we had some kids and, I've got a family and we, that 9-month gap, we decided we were going to travel a little bit. Like, the kids were grown up and we were going to do some travel. So we went on like a 4-month tour of the United States or whatever. Like, we hopped in an RV and we just went camping, for an entire summer. I just got out of work so I could be offline. I didn't have to worry about, being available for, an office and things like that. Nobody's going to care about that. Nobody's going to blink at that kind of thing. If you've got a story to tell, people love stories. So figure out what your story is and explain that story. And I think that most recruiters are going to be just fine with that. Looking back through chat, would that long gap also say they received a severance payout? I mean, potentially. Yeah, that's a great point, Camillo. So looking at that gap where they had, 7-month job and then an extended gap, it could be that they got a severance. It totally depends. It depends on why they left. And again, if you get let go from a job, it's not really your fault. Well, if there's a layoff, it's not your fault that you left. If you got dismissed from a job, then you kind of need to explain, okay, well, why did you get dismissed? Like, what happened? Like, did you do something like egregious and really, really bad that caused you to lose your job? Or did they let a whole bunch of people go? Like, did they decide to close the company? I mean, I don't know the story about what happened with that particular company. G&D says, do you backdate the projects because it's already been 15 months? Well, it's really hard to do if you put them on GitHub. It's really hard to kind of backdate that stuff. You can play around with your system date when you do your Git commits. And then like when you do your Git commit, it'll actually show up as, several months ago. You can kind of do that stuff. And there are tools that I've seen where it'll actually manipulate your Git history so that when you go to GitHub, the little graph with all the dots actually spell out words like hire me. So you can go in and you can like kind of tinker with the Git history, but if they see that you're tinkering with your Git history, it puts the whole thing into suspicion around like, is any of this legit? Is any of this timeline legit? So I would caution, like, be careful about that, but you could backdate things. You could also say like, yeah, I actually worked on this project several months ago, but it was all offline. And then I realized, yeah, you know what, I should have put this on GitHub. And so I just recently put it on GitHub, but I've actually been working on it for a year. If they can see that project and they see a lot of code in there, even if there's only like a single commit of like, I decided to put everything up on GitHub on one day and it's a single commit. If there's a lot of code there, then people are going to look at that and go, okay, yeah, this is a substantial project. I believe that this took a year to build. But if you're like, oh yeah, I worked on this really amazing app for a year, and they kind of look at it and it's like, this is just a to-do list tutorial, from somebody's site, for a framework. It's like, that probably took you an afternoon. And so that's why having code on GitHub can be really beneficial, where they can see a commit history and things like that, because they can see a legitimate timeline of when you're actually doing your work and when you've been working on those projects. So yeah, you can backdate it, but I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't recommend doing it, because again, I think it puts too many other things into suspicion if you start tinkering with that kind of stuff. G&D followed up in chat and said, yeah, it's already, I know it's sketchy. I was just curious. So how is the gap explained moving forward? Well, once you find that next job, again, like every other job after that, if they say like, hey, what happened? You know, you were only at that job for 7 months and then you were kind of off for a while. You just tell the same story and just say, well, I was doing some consulting work, or I took some time off, you know, because the company folded, we got a severance. And so I took some more time off with family. We did a little more travel. Or, you know, it was in the middle of the pandemic and we couldn't really go anywhere. And I was kind of like stuck. Like no one's going to think twice about, you know, blaming things on the pandemic. That's really not that big of an issue. So the fact that they lost their job in the middle of the pandemic, or they left that job in the middle of the pandemic, it could have been part of the, you know, the whole Great Resignation thing. It was early 2021. So it was right around, like, companies have been shut down since March of 2020. They got that job in June of 2020. So after the pandemic started. So maybe they were working remote for a while, and then the company's like, we really want people to come back to the office. And maybe they decided like, I didn't want to go back to the office. And so we worked something out and I left the job because they weren't going to let me continue remote or something like that. So I decided I was just going to, you know, work on some side projects. Again, if you've got a story to tell, you just have to be consistent about how you tell that story. And so any other future job, if they bring it up, you just tell the same story. And this is where you don't want to lie about things, because you don't want to have to remember what the lie is. If you come up with a story and say, this is what happened, and you can explain it and it's the truth, then you're always going to be able to tell that story. That's why I advocate a lot for just being honest and just, you know, having integrity and just explain what happened. And if it was something bad and you're like, yeah, I took some time off and then I realized like my skills were not as sharp and, you know, I needed to kind of spend more time, you know, learning some things, and, you know, explain it. Just come up with an explanation. I'll help you with coming up with an explanation that's not going to sound like drastically bad. Because again, you don't want to sound like a risk. You don't want to sound like it's going to be a problem if they hire you. And again, because they had, that particular person had a history of working at jobs for long periods of time, and then they had like that one recent outlier where they were at a job for a short amount of time. Again, probably no one's going to care, especially when it's in the middle of a pandemic. No one's going to care. What they are going to care about is that when you go to that next job, that you are there for several more years. And so they could also explain that as part of the time gap around, I want to make sure that this next job I'm at is a long-term job. And so I'm looking for a company that I really fit in with, where the culture is exactly what I need it to be, and the tech stack is exactly where I want to take my career, and that it also provides me an opportunity for growth myself, because I don't want to get stale in my skills. And so I'm taking the time to like really pinpoint the company where I want to work, and because I want to be there for a long period of time. Explain that as your value and your contribution to the company. Like every company is going to be happy to talk to you at that point, as long as you're showing relevant skill and you're showing your relevancy to them and the value that you bring to their company. Then I think that those are all just solid points to talk about in an interview that I don't think any recruiter is really going to blink at. But the fact that it's been so long, you do need to show that you've been working in some way on your professional growth over that 15 months, you know, and going, right, is be able to show something about growth in there. Cool. So those were the main things I kind of wanted to talk about today. Is you know, do the one resume review and then talk about gaps, and then how to explain gaps, and you know, the kinds of things that go through like a hiring manager's mind. Like when I first saw the resume and I was actually going through and building the resume review, I'm kind of like, oh, these are a lot of gaps. Like you got a lot of gaps on here. But then I started doing the math and started realizing like, oh, you know what? You worked for a decade and then you took some time off, and you worked for almost another decade and you took some time off. Like that's fine. No one's going to care about that. No one's going to blink about that kind of stuff. Hey, Subsector, good to see you. Thanks for dropping by chat. Everybody go give Subsector a follow as well if you're into Star Trek and Subsector 3D. They do a lot of cool like maker creator kind of stuff. They're big into 3D printing. I've got a whole bunch of 3D printing going right now. I've got if you go over to Loyal Moses's site, he's sort of promoting like a designer of the month, and they basically modeled this little BD1 droid from Star Wars, and they came up with a whole 3D printed model. And I've got like, I don't know if you can see them on the desk behind me here, but I've got like 3 of the models printed out, 2 in silver, 1 in kind of a mustard yellow, and I'm printing 1 up in black, and then I'm going to mix and match the colored parts. And then I want to find 1 in white and like mix and match some of the parts, so the droids will be kind of different colors. And so yeah, so you can go subscribe to Loyal Moses Patreon, and then you get free access to that design. So he's basically commissioning a designer to come up with a model specific for his community each month. So it'd be pretty fun. No more clapping for new follows. Who's my recent follower? So yeah, I mean, we have clapping for new follows. Have like blinky lights and applause and stuff. Like, woo! But nobody new followed there. So Subsector 3D is just someone that is part of the same 3D printing community that I'm a part of, and we're like big into like polymaker filament and stuff like that. Lots of giveaways and stuff like that. I've won probably 4 or 5 spools of filament on different channels, so it's been a lot of fun. Camilo asked in chat, most of my projects are at school. I can't make my code public on GitHub. So have to maybe use something like GitHub Pages to showcase my projects that way. What would you suggest? I would say I would kind of question if you're making projects for school, why can't you make those public? If you are doing full-time work and you're working in private repos, that's fine. You can still show your contribution in a private repo on your GitHub graph. So there's a setting that you can say, I want to show the contributions to private repos, but it won't show what the repo name was or what your contribution was. It'll just say you made 10 commits to this private repo last Tuesday. And so it'll start to fill in your GitHub graph with contributions to private repos. And so that's one way that you can show your contributions there. If they are school projects, though, I would do everything you can to make them public. There's no great reason why those can't be public. I would kind of question, like, if your school is telling you to make them as private repos, I would kind of push back on that, because as an employer, I want to see how you do development. I like to see public repos so I can see how long did it take you to do this? What was your actual commit timeline? What are your commit messages like? Are you professional in your Git commit messages? There are some great Twitter feeds that actually go through and scrape GitHub looking for cuss words. And they like literally the only thing in the Twitter stream that this Twitter bot publishes are Git commit messages with swear words, and some of them are funny. I mean, if you find that kind of stuff funny, but it's more like the attitude of the angst of, like, stern, flipping, blah blah blah, beep 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 beep, kind of censor sort of text and so on. Some of them are pretty funny though. Like when you know as a developer, it's like, oh yeah, I totally empathize with what they're going through and why they threw some cuss words in there. But some of them are like really bad. Like some of them are horrible. So please be professional in your GitHub commits. But yeah, wherever possible, I like to see public commits, especially for students, especially for group projects, so I can see what your level of involvement was on a group project. Because to say, I worked on a group project and we had a repo, but sorry, that repo is private. It's like, okay, well, I don't know whether you wrote like a little bit of the code or most of the code. Like, I want to see what your level of involvement was. Like, you can tell me, and I've got to kind of trust that. But if I can see it for myself, then I know that I can trust what you're saying on your resume. And that also adds credibility to other things that you're telling me on the resume that maybe I can't verify. And so again, it's kind of building up this idea of integrity and what they can believe about you. So the school said, don't make it public, it avoids plagiarism. Yeah, I get it. But at the same time, I would say, like, here's what I would do. Once the project's done, I would make it public. If they're worried about students behind you plagiarizing, that's on them as a school. That's not on you as a student. It's not your job to help them fight plagiarism. It's your job to get a job after school. And so I would make your repos public. Like once the project's over and none of your current classmates can copy your work, I would make it public after that. If they're worried about other students coming behind you and copying your work, that's on them. But it's also on them because they're reusing the same projects over and over. They should be coming up with new projects where it's the same kind of theme, but like different enough that students can't easily copy, what happened there. When I worked at Turing, we had the same problem. We gave students the same kinds of projects over and over, and we had to watch out for plagiarism. So we're like, okay, well, these are the themes. Like, we want you to go build a RESTful API. This one's going to be about an ice cream truck, and this one's going to be about a pet store, and this one's going to be about such and such. And it's like every one was a little bit different. Like the overall theme was the same. You still had to understand the concept of how to go build a RESTful API, but the theme of the overall project that you were building was different. And so I would say once the project is over and you're not worried about your current classmates copying your work, make your repo public. It's up to them to protect plagiarism. It's not on you to help them protect that. So I would just make them public after the fact. Like once it's handed in and it's graded, make your repos public. Back in school, the teacher made it clear that if it seems like code is being copied, everybody involved fails. Yeah. And most schools do have plagiarism policies like that. If you share it, then it's on you, not the ones that are copied from you. Yeah, exactly. So if you're sharing your code with someone else, then yeah, you deserve to take the hit. But once the project's over, make it public. If someone else copies your work, it's on them, not on you. I mean, the fact that you made it public is no big deal. But it's not up to the school to put that requirement on you, because your job as a student is to go get a job, and they should be doing everything possible to help you get that job. So yeah, I would just make them public. Let them deal with plagiarism. That's their job. How's my audio today? Is it cutting in and out, or has it been pretty consistent? I've had a lot of issues with the microphone and filtering and stuff lately. So I'm kind of curious for those that are listening, if it's been pretty consistent or if it sounds choppy or sounds like it's cutting out. It's hard for me to monitor it and kind of pay attention to that because I get distracted by hearing my own voice if I, turn the volume on in another browser. Like I have another browser window up where I can still see that, it's actually streaming and working, but audio's great. It's been solid. Awesome. Thanks. Appreciate that. Cool. I am going to adjust one of my cameras here a tiny bit. Go that a little bit more. There you go. Just feels like I'm crowding my TV over here, where it used to be like, it used to feel like I was way over here, but now it feels like I'm still standing in my usual spot. So I don't know. Something happened where things got shifted around. I think it's the angle of the camera, but I'll deal with that later on. So yeah, so if you want to have some fun with the lights, you can do like bang flash or bang with a color, and it'll change all the lights behind me. I do want to like try to figure out how to do a little more interactivity, especially on the nanoleaf panels, to see if I can get it to play like a particular effect. Like I've got, I'm just gonna like go completely off on a tangent here. And I also would love to control the lights a little bit separately. So yeah, there's red, there's like a police, there's an RGB that'll like toggle all the RGB colors. Now the light up at the very, very top that you see up here, like if you turn it back to green, the light that you see up at the very, very top here doesn't change. That's because that's just on a plain LED strip, and that one gets controlled with a little remote control, where these lights are actually like internet connected. But I can come into here and I can go to favorites and I can set this to like Boba Fett colors. Turn down the, so it does like the green and the red and the gold and the black and whatever for like Boba Fett, which is fun. Or I can do like Web Slinger, which is the Spider-Man colors, and it's like red and blue and gold and whatever from Spider-Man. And so I want to see if there's a way that I can do those as bang commands. So you can do like bang Spider-Man and it'll like play this one, or bang Boba Fett and it'll do the Boba Fett one, as opposed to just solid colors. So I'm trying this thing out that Loyal Moses uses on his stream. I forget what it's called. It's called Lumia Stream. and it's a paid product, but they give you 7 days for free. So I'm just tinkering with it today just to see what it's like. But I could totally build a chat bot where I'm just watching for these bang commands and like have it do something interesting with the lights. I just have to figure out how to get it to interact with my local network for the Nanoleaf, but the internet network for the Govy light down here at the bottom. And the fact that their software makes all of the lights the exact same color. I would like to control a little bit differently, like do like a bang with an N and then a color, and that'll do the Nanoleaf, and do like a bang and a G, and that'll do the Govy light down here at the bottom or something. I don't know. I want to do something a little bit different, or do like bang Nanoleaf green and bang Govy blue or something, like just let people play around or something. Goofy stuff, you know, whatever it takes for engagement. I'm a little curious why my drop browser game stopped working. I have to go see what's up with that. I'm gonna see if I can pull that up in a browser window here. See why that stopped working for me. Oops, wrong window. Let's go live debug stuff on a stream, because that's fun for everybody to watch, right? At least I'm not dealing with audio problems today, I guess. I guess that's a plus. Yeah, for some reason the drop game completely stopped working. Let's try this again. Log in with Twitch. Oh, you know what it is? No, that should work okay. Parachute drop. It should work. Let's try it now. I think I had to go give it like new permissions or something. Nope, still doesn't work. Why doesn't that work? Unless it was like a free thing or something and now it doesn't work anymore. I don't know. It used to work. I don't see it showing up on the other screen. But I also don't get an error when I actually try to load it. I don't see any sort of error messages to like why it doesn't work. Why do you not work? I don't want to show clouds. Enable drop via chat, yep. Check command, and drop. Oh. Is that what I needed? Choose a theme. Sure, we'll do Easter. What the heck? How do I then actually get the new... So I'm going in and I'm setting all my settings, but it doesn't actually give me the new link to actually put in OBS so you can actually play the game. All right, so back to chat. Juggling Biohazard asks, if someone is transitioning from a non-tech job to their first tech job, what are some noticeable habits or tells that a person isn't ready for the job? Ooh, that's an interesting question. Things that stand out that make me think you're not ready yet for your first job. That one's a little tough. I mean, there's definitely some interaction between like how you've done your projects, how well you can communicate what you've learned from a technical perspective, and also the kinds of projects that you've worked on. So if you've got, I'm just thinking back to an example, like when I was a hiring manager, I met with somebody who had a lot of passion for what our company did, and they had gone to a code school, and the code school was like 9 weeks or 10 weeks long, and they had one project to show for it. And I'm like, okay, well, that's not a lot of education, and you've only got one project for me to see what you're capable of doing. And so for me, they weren't ready. They didn't know anything about test-driven development. They had never actually done like real production level code. They just didn't have the level of experience that I was looking for on the team. And yeah, there's going to be ramp up at any job, and there's going to be things to learn at any job. But what their school had taught them was, don't worry about things like TDD. You're going to learn that on the job. Like, the company that you go work at is going to teach you those things. And that always stuck out to me as a little bit odd, because for me, like, yeah, you're going to learn some aspects of those things, but you know, like, you still need to show some level of initiative that you can go learn those things yourself. And so that's where I would kind of question, you know, what, like, the advice that the school was giving them. So that told me that the school didn't do a good job at educating them on how to go learn themselves so that they could show that initiative. And so those would be the kinds of things that would stand out to me that says that someone's not ready for a job. If you do have a pretty rich project portfolio where maybe you've got 3, 4, 5 or more projects, that shows, okay, you've got a pretty good understanding of different kinds of projects. You've worked on different kinds of things. If you can show me that you've worked on solo projects and group projects, that's even better, because then that shows me that you can do collaboration and sort of team-based communication. So those are all also very good signals, as we call them. Beyond that, I would say other things that stand out that make me think that you're not ready. I would be asking you questions about, like, your discipline, like how do you work on a project? And if you say, like, oh, you know, I kind of, like, I procrastinate and then I, like, get it all done, like, the night before, it's like, okay, well, then you're not ready for like a real full-time job, because you can't really do that on the job. It's not going to be sustainable to do that. And so being more aware of, like, how long did it take you to build this project? When did you start? When did you finish? And again, that's where I can kind of go back and look at your GitHub history to say, like, you know, you can say, like, oh yeah, I built this project. And I can say, well, how long did you have at school to actually build that project? And you can say, oh, it was a 2-week project. And I go look at your commit history, and your commit history is all like the last 4 days. It's like, okay, well, you didn't do anything for a week and a half, and then suddenly you started coding and you had to crank everything out in 4 days. To me, that would show that you procrastinate, and then, like, suddenly you've got crunch time, and you're going to burn yourself out that way. And so my worry is that you're going to burn yourself out coming into the job where you're, you know, there's a thing with like ADHD, for example. I was doing some research on ADHD, you know, over the past year, where it can cause procrastination. And then because of the procrastination, suddenly you're like, oh shoot, now I have to get it done. And you go all in and you pull all-nighters, and, like, you gotta like try to pull the rabbit out of the hat, so to speak. Like, you gotta make this thing happen. And it can cause burnout. And people are like, what's your progress? What's your progress? What's your progress? And you're like, oh yeah, I'm totally working on it. I'm almost done. I'm nearly done. You know, it's like the joke of, like, oh yeah, I'm, like, parking my car. I'm, like, getting ready to walk into the restaurant. And you haven't even left your house yet, kind of thing. And you don't want to be doing that on a full-time job. Like, that's going to be really risky, and you're more likely to, like, get disciplinary action around that kind of stuff. And so those would be the kinds of things that would stand out to me around, like, how long did you have to do the project, and then when did you actually get the project work done? Those would be the kinds of things that I would be prompting a student about during an interview, so that I can get an idea of, like, what is your discipline when it comes to actually working on projects. Because that's what's going to stand out to me then when you're my employee, around, like, how you're actually going to do the job, and so on. So those would be, like, some of the initial things that come to mind for me. GND says, as an add-on to this, is it ever recommended to just leave out all, most, or some of the non-relevant tech work experience? So again, you do want to show that you've been previously employed. Like, I've been trusted as an employee, especially if it's, like, some sort of customer interaction where you've been in a position of trust of any kind. Those are important things to have. And so I wouldn't ever make a resume where you don't explain any of your previous experience, but you do want to show only the relevant experience. Like, if you were a babysitter, like that, like, unless you're doing something where you're taking care of clients or something like that, where you actually have to, like, go interact with clients and, like, make sure their needs are met or something, not in a babysitting sense, but just, you know, how to take care of people and sort of anticipate their needs and like fill their needs or something, then putting your babysitting job on your resume is irrelevant. So that would be the kind of thing that I mentioned. Like when you're building that really long resume, you're putting every job and giving me lots of bullet points about every job. But when you go to build a resume for a particular role, for a particular company, you're going to trim out everything that doesn't matter. And so it's going to be up to you to discern, like, what is that company actually going to care about? And you want to pull out things from their job description around the technologies and around the things that are important to them as you research the company and understand like the company values and the company goals and things like that. You want to find out like what parts of your resume are actually going to be applicable that you should speak to. So yeah, those would be the kinds of things where you want to explain that background. You just want to make sure that what you put on the resume is actually relevant to them. Now, if you need to fill up the space, like let's say you start to put it together and it's not quite a page, and you need to add that babysitting job to fill up the page, do that. Or if you put all of the relevant experience and it turns into a page and a half, well, you don't want to have to trim away another half of relevant information. So then you can fill up the other half of page 2 with less relevant information. And so what's not relevant to them, or the things that you care about, like passion projects and whatever, you can use to fill the actual space on the page. But you want to start with only the most relevant information that company's going to care about, and then fill it in from there. Juggling Biohazard says, good question. I personally would remove as much as possible. Maybe showing that you can remain employable for a long time in a non-related field helps. Yeah, absolutely. Again, they're looking at the amount of time that you're spending at some of these jobs too, of like, are you a habitual job hopper? Like, are you only going to stay for 6 months? Like, if your last 5 jobs were like 6 to 8 months, I'm going to worry about hiring you. Because again, as I talked about earlier in the stream, it's going to take you a month or 2 to ramp up. And once you decide to leave, I kind of backdate a month from there, because that's about the time that you're thinking of leaving, and you start interviewing, and then you get that job and you put in your notice. You got like a month and a half there. And so if you've got 2 to 3 months on the front and maybe 2 months on the end, and you're only there for 6 months, that means I only got 2 months of actual work out of you over that 6 months. And so, yeah, I would say like that's where companies are going to be a little more worried, is when they see that job hopping is a habit, and that there's like a regular pattern of you changing jobs all the time. Now in tech, it is expected that you're going to change jobs to some degree periodically, like every year or 2 years. But if you're even in tech, if you're changing that tech job every 6 months to 8 months, some people do it just to get a better title, more pay. Companies understand that. But if you're doing it over and over and over and over, then companies are going to be less likely to want to interview you and hire you, because they're worried you're only going to stay for 6 months. When I hire somebody, I need to get at least a year out of them to get a good return on the investment of how much it costs to hire you, as well as how much ROI I'm getting for hiring you in the first place. I mentioned on a previous stream, like when I hire a developer, I need to get probably 2 to 3 times the value out of the software that you write than what I'm paying your salary. So if you're worth $100,000 a year, I need you to be developing $200,000 to $300,000 worth of product or signups or engineering value to the company per person. And it sounds like a lot. And that's why management is really hard, because I got to try to figure out like, how are my engineers actually returning that value to the company? And so when you think about it like that, and you realize like, okay, and then if I'm only getting that 2 months worth of work out of you, over that 6 month span, it makes it even worse. So try to stay at a job as long as you can, like, get as much knowledge and go as deep as you can on a lot of things. And showing, yeah, kind of like what Juggling was saying, like if you can show that you're employable for a long period of time, that looks much better for you as an employee for sure. Chris Perillo lurking in chat. Good to see you, Chris. Yeah, everybody go give Chris a follow too. Chris is actually hilarious. Shout out to Chris Perillo. I forget how long Chris has been on Twitch now. Chris was probably like one of the first like 100 people to sign up on Twitch, I think, back in the day. Chris has been on Twitch for ridiculous number of years, like was it 12 years or something you've been on Twitch. But Chris is really, really entertaining to go watch. Saturdays he does like Saturday morning cereal, and sometimes he'll show a TV with like old like retro TV shows and stuff like that, and we'll all get in and reminisce about like, oh yeah, gummy bears, and then someone will be like, yeah, you should see this metal cover of the Gummy Bears song, and we'll like, you know, jam out on YouTube listening to like heavy metal version of the Gummy Bears theme song or whatever. So yeah, Chris's channel is really entertaining. Chris is also big into 3D printing. He has a little Prusa Mini, and he's usually printing something Star Wars related. I've got a bunch of those BD-1 droids still in pieces on my desk behind me, and I got a fourth one printing now. I'm probably going to get 2 more and a couple of other colors so I can kind of mix and match the colors of the parts. I'll get those assembled later today. But yeah, so today's theme was basically just resume reviews and talking about gaps on resumes. So yeah, thanks for hanging out today. I'm going to wrap it up here because I got some lunch plans. So I'll get this up on YouTube a little bit later tonight, I think. And then we'll see you all on Thursday. Had me at the metal version of Gummy Bears. Can I show some prints? Sure. Anybody play Cut the Rope? Does anybody know Cut the Rope? When I say the video game Cut the Rope, does anybody know what I'm talking about? Who knows what Cut the Rope? What's the name of the character from Cut the Rope? Come on, Twitch chat, help me out. What's the name? What's the name of the character from Cut the Rope? What's the little green figurine's name from Cut the Rope? Come on. Like Fruit Ninja, but with rope? Kind of, yeah. You don't know the name? You don't remember Om-Nom? Om-Nom normally has a little antenna, but his antenna broke. So yeah, that's one of my 3D prints. I did one in resin. I had a resin printer for a little while, and I'm a huge Deadpool nut, so I made the Deadpool bust, and the detail on this is ridiculous. Like, you can't see layer lines at all on this. But this is probably one of my favorite prints. I have modeled a version of this to print in multiple filaments. I've got a multi-filament color change system. I actually have several of them. And I want to print the Deadpool bust in like red with the black and the white, and like, you know, brown sword handles, and, you know, the bandoliers and all the pockets, and, you know, like a silver grenade and stuff like that. So I've got it digitally colored and painted. I just have to get my actual multicolor filament thing working to get it working. I used to teach little STEM classes to kids where we would teach them about just basic geometry and teach them how to build like a little keychain with their name on it. And then I would take them home and I would print them, and I'd say, okay, well, what color do you want the keychain? And you could pick a base color, and then you could pick a color for the font and the outline. And we showed them how to build their own keychain. And so they made their keychain whatever color they wanted. What else have I got here? I usually have a handful of things. Let me go find a few more. Of course, as I walk away, you can see the Star Wars Wrecker helmet. So this is one that I printed on my printer, but my Prusa printer won't print it big enough to actually fit on an adult head. In fact, this won't even fit my 11-year-old's head. So the size of this will probably fit like a 5 to 8-year-old child. But they turn out really nice. This was kind of a dark sparkle blue filament from Polymaker that they actually don't make anymore. And then, you know, the ubiquitous like flower vase of some kind. This is one design that I found that's actually watertight. Some vases, when you print them, because of the gaps in the plastic, it'll actually leak. But this particular vase model, it actually prints really nice. And I actually printed that in this filament, which actually changes color as it prints. And so if you notice the magic there, it goes from purple to kind of a red color, and then back to purple. And so basically what's happening is it's a 2-color filament, and so as it prints, the angle of what it prints actually changes the color, and so you can get some really neat effects with that. But you can also find some really intricate little things. So this was also done on a regular sort of FDM printer with the filament. So it's just a little castle model. And then, of course, my favorite, which I did a gigantic giveaway back in December, is these articulated dragons. So this is a dark gray filament that glows in the dark as a sparkly green color. And so, you know, this dragon, if you put them under like a really bright flashlight or something for a few seconds and then turn all the lights off, it'll actually glow kind of a sparkle green color, which is probably my new favorite filament. So yeah, you can do all kinds of really interesting things. And the nice thing about these articulated toys is it 3D prints that hinge in place. So there's nothing to assemble. You literally take it off the printer and, you know, it bends and moves and stuff just like this. So I printed a bunch for some coworkers. My coworker in San Francisco just got theirs this week. Coworker in the UK, I think, is going to get theirs in several more weeks because it takes a while to get across the pond, as they say. So yeah, the Deadpool is only missing a paint job. Yeah, I thought about painting it because it's like super smooth. It is like so smooth. This is like my favorite print ever. But then I gave up on resin because resin's super messy and it's also very toxic to the environment. So I decided to get rid of my resin printer until they come up with something that's a little more eco-friendly. Once they come up with something more eco-friendly, I will probably get back into resin printing because the detail is absolutely unmatched. And then I mentioned Loyal Moses has a Patreon where he's promoting a designer of the month, and they designed this little BD-1 droid from Star Wars, and you can basically print that in a whole bunch of pieces. And those pieces just look like this, and then they all kind of interlock together somehow, some way. I don't even know. I haven't looked at the instructions yet, but the detail on them is pretty good too. Try to find a piece with some more detail on it. One sec. So this is the droid's head. And it looks a little bit like Wall-E from the Disney movie. So I've got it in kind of this mustard yellow, and I've got two of them in this really bright silver sort of color. And I've got one printing now in kind of a flat black. And I'm gonna kind of mix and match the parts so that I get different droids in different colors instead of just one droid all one color. And so we'll kind of mix and match the colors a little bit to have some fun with that. So I'll probably get those on the stream at some point. I've thought about like looping in like 3D printer cameras and stuff like that on the stream, but it's like, well, this stream's about like interview prep and things like that, so it's not really a general purpose kind of channel. But I have been thinking a little bit more about like streaming with gaming and 3D printing and stuff like that too, because there's a lot of engagement around some of that stuff. Not that I do this to make money, but one thing that I will mention, kind of going back to the resume review. So the person that asked me for that private review, I let them know like, hey, I charge $50 for a private resume review, and I basically put together like a 45-minute video where I go through and I give a crap ton of information to them about like what I like about the resume, what stands out about their resume, what they need to improve from my perspective. And I made sure that they knew ahead of time, like, hey, that $50 is not going in my pocket. I fully donate 100% of that money. And so I'm working on a webpage right now where I can figure out a way where when Twitch does a payout to me, that it can auto update that page where you can see that your donations to me are going 100% to other organizations and groups that are promoting diversity in tech. And so every single penny that I make in 2022, because again, I don't do this to make money at all, I'm turning all of that money over to other groups that are promoting diversity in tech, because it's something that's very near and dear to me. And so please know that if like all the bits that get donated, the subscriptions, which I appreciate, all of that money, 100% of that money is being turned over to other groups who are promoting diversity in tech. I'm not keeping a single penny of that money. So just to be fully transparent about that, but I want to be transparent about it to the point of actually putting up a page on the website saying these were the donations that came in. Not who they're from, but these were the donations that came in, or the subscriptions and the payments that came in from Twitch, and this is who I gave that money to. So I want to be transparent about who I'm giving it to, and also the fact that I'm giving it away. And I'll put screenshots in my emails and things like that of like, you know, proving that the donation went in and stuff like that, because I want to be transparent about that. I don't want to just say like, oh yeah, I'm giving all this money to charity in hopes of raising money. I'm actually going to do it. And I want to be fully transparent about it. So appreciate everybody's involvement in that, in helping me with that. And if you want to get involved in that, please explore that on your own. If you have the means and the capability of like donating to those kinds of groups, please do so. It's super, super important. Juggling says, I've been wanting to get into 3D printing. Biggest fear is burning down the house. There are some 3D printers that are dangerous in that sense. So you have to go with a trusted brand. And if you're really interested in 3D printers, you definitely need to go check out Loyal Moses. So let me give them a shout out here. So shout out to Loyal Moses. Loyal is actually giving away a 3D printer this coming Friday. Someone in his community donated a printer and he's giving it away this Friday. Last Friday, he gave away 2 3D printers. Well, he was going to give away 2 3D printers. One person asked if they could get a laser engraver instead because it costs the same amount of money. Then the other person got a 3D printer that is big enough to 3D print helmets. Gave away 2 printers. He gave away a printer the previous Friday. Chris Perillo that I mentioned gives away filament. Loyal, like every single stream, he's giving away 3D filament or 3D like there's like a glue and an adhesive called Gloop. He gives away bottles of Gloop, but almost every stream he's giving away filament from Polymaker. Focus is a pretty good printer company and they're sponsoring his channel. He's trying to talk to Anycubic, I think, about getting a sponsorship as well on his channel. So go check out Loyal Moses. He gives away tons of stuff. I think he's given away like 35, maybe 40 printers since he started streaming, and he's only been streaming for 6 months. And he's given away like tons of stuff. So go check out Loyal Moses for sure. Mighty Bean, hey, good to see you. Thanks for dropping by. Give some claps for the first time chat. Good to have you here. Go follow Mighty Bean too. Mighty Bean's actually really entertaining to go watch too. Let me give you a shout out here. Mighty Bean. Yeah, Mighty Bean has a really fun workshop, does a lot of really interactive stuff. I love the little Igor thing that you've got on your stream where it's listening to his voice and like little animations come out on his screen and like broadcast things. And very, very entertaining. So yeah, go check out Mighty Bean. Really great stream, lots of retro stuff. Got 3D printing in there as well. But also really cool like retro. Like we were nerding out watching him play like Dig Dug and Donkey Kong on his Commodore 64 a couple of weeks back, and trying to get like controllers working again and all kinds of stuff. So yeah, go check out Mighty Bean. It's a great channel. And I won't give too much away, but Mighty Bean works for Minecraft. Actually works on developing the Minecraft game. And my kids found out about that and they're like, can we watch his stream too? I'm like, sure. So my kids have watched a little bit. They're like super into Minecraft, so they love kind of nerding out on that. So if you ever go like down a well on talking about Minecraft, let me know ahead of time, and I'll go wake the kids up so we can come watch your stream, because they love the idea of like actually seeing someone and interact with somebody that works on their favorite game. So it'll be fun. Yeah, there's a whole makers and crafting category on Twitch for sure. There are a ton of people, especially on 3D printing, a lot of crafting, a lot of sewing, a lot of like cross stitch kind of stuff, a lot of stuff going on. I'm late to meet a friend for lunch, so I got to jump off the stream, but I appreciate everybody hanging out. I'll see you again on Thursday. I'm going to probably stream a little bit more on my work account, so go check out the name down here, Ian the Postmonaut. You can go follow me there, and I'll be streaming throughout the week around some of the programming stuff I do for work, but I gotta run. I'll catch you folks next time. Have a great day.